Welcome to the show, everyone. Welcome, and we're looking for where is the beef? I mean, the challenge. Where are the challenge in today's games? I'm your host, Nick, and with me I have Mike.
Straight out of Diddley-Ompton.
And with also have Greg joining us.
Straight from Greg Spice.
Yes, indeed. And today, folks, we're going to talk about games of today that, you know, they provide compelling stories, but are they getting a little too easy? So I think we're going to make a mention maybe of one game of our choice around the table and, you know, see if we can find out why these games can come off like a little too much like they're holding your hand. And then I think it'd be nice for us to make a mention of also games that can deliver a great story and also like a strong challenge as well. And like I wasn't the one that came up with this topic. It was actually you, Mike. And why did you decide to pick this topic?
So, as many of you who know, and if you don't, I do a lot of retro gaming, and one thing I notice about retro games is they are extremely difficult. I haven't really played too many older games where, even today, I can beat them without, like, putting a lot of time and effort in. Whereas newer games, I beat all the time. Like, I can't remember the last time I didn't finish a game, and, you know, so is it, like, I was wondering, like, you know, gameplay has gotten worse, but storytelling has gotten better. You know, obviously a story in a Mega Man game didn't really matter. You know,
Yeah.
It was just a little blurb. It would set you up just to give you kind of some idea of why you're doing what you're doing. So the challenge was in gameplay. So now, like, as narrative has taken over and, you know, games have become more of a storytelling, like, medium, which is great. You know, I love story, but I still want to be challenged in games, and I find myself rarely challenged.
Good point. And I think we kind of made it like an exception as far as a couple of exceptions as to what we wanted to include. And I don't think you could have said it any better. But I think some of the games that we're going to exclude are RPGs. Was that correct?
Well, that was kind of the standards I came up with. You know, RPGs.
Yeah.
That's obviously always been a very narrative-driven, you know, game like genre. Even on older platforms, you know, you have story, you have character development, and those are the ones that, you know, kind of still consistently today, you know, provide. You know, you get Dark Souls and Bloodborne that are meant to be hard. You know, they still provide a challenge, but they don't all. I mean, even a game like Dragon Age, which I thought was great, and it was a hard game, still had a lot of like fetch quests and simple stuff to it. So, and then also another criteria I came up with is it had to be hard on the regular difficulty setting, not like, you know, you bump it up to like the expert level, like Last of Us. You know, Last of Us, when you play it on the hardest difficulty, is an extremely difficult game. But,
Yeah.
you know, when you play it on normal, it's fun and it's a great game, but it's not the hardest on the planet.
But yeah, I mean, it definitely had its moments, but I guess you're just a better gamer than me. I don't know, like, holy crap. The freaking, the first time you encountered those clickers, man, I was having a real rough time. But I guess your mileage may vary when it comes to difficulties with certain games, but I pretty much get what you're saying. And I think we can go as far as saying we can exclude, like, retro games to some extent. Like, I want to say, like, Super NES, Nintendo, like, because, like, alright, let's face the fact, like, back then games, like, Nintendo games were, like, they were a different kind of hard. Sometimes they didn't even have a difficulty setting. I just want to call them Nintendo hard. Like, I think it's safe to say that, right?
Well, you know, I have like a Rescue Rangers game on the original Nintendo. You know, here's a game that everyone would assume would be geared towards younger kids. My parents bought it for me because I was younger and I loved the Rescue Rangers. I still can't get much farther in that game than I did as like an 8-year-old. Like,
Yeah, that's totally understandable. I mean, I'd have to give that game another dive as well. I think this would be a good time to transition our way to some of these examples, like, just to get people a good idea of what we're trying to explain.
Well, actually, before we go into that, I think one part of this problem, part of this equation, is the fact that game developers haven't found a way to cope with a consequence of death in a game. like since we got out of the realm of lives or quarters, the standard ways that really made games hard. You ran out of lives, you had to start over. Now with saves and just infinite, it doesn't make sense. So you just have infinite respawns. So there's no wait to death. You don't care if you die. There's no reason to maybe try and be a little more careful. Like when you're playing a game, it's just trial and error.
Oh, that's not to mention even if you use like an emulator of some sort, not something I don't really condone, but you can use that to save state, to save the exact point where you're having some difficulty, so you don't have to, even if you're given unlimited lives, you don't have to backtrack all the way to where you're at the point you're saying. And for me to actually point that out, I'd have to say that I'm guilty of using that. So
well, I mean, it's essentially like like back in the day, like you pop a Game Genie into the game you're having trouble with, and you put that infinite lives in, and you're gonna beat whatever game you're playing.
Yeah.
Just like how today, like there's no reason to really think about how you're gonna approach something in a game like Last of Us, because you have that. Okay, well, like sometimes in games, even like a Metal Gear game, if I screw up, I'll just let them kill me.
Yeah.
And just try again. Like I don't even want to try and get out of the situation I'm in. I'm just like, well, I'll just die, and then I'll just go back and I'll rework my way through the area.
Good point. So I think now is a more appropriate time than ever to actually dive into an example. Like I want to say within the last several generations, I'll bring up the first one. So a game that was too easy, but had solid storytelling. And you know what? Like, as much as we're bringing like negative limelight to the situation of games being too easy, there's a difference in the one that I'm about to bring up, and that is Telltale games, more specifically The Walking Dead. Now, the way you maneuver gameplay-wise, very easy. You just move your way to person, discuss what's going on. Even when there's a little bit of action that happens to go down, there isn't like a huge like skill set that you need to have to get past what you're trying to do. But I want to say that the decisions you make in that game can really be taxing as far as your mental state. The decisions you make are going to change the way the story plays, and that's what makes like the story in that game so great, because you don't know what you're gonna do, how it's gonna affect other people around you. So I mean, there's a game like, as far as like playing wise, you're more watching a story than actually playing a game, and maybe that could be a turn off for some people. But I mean, I think it's okay, and I think it's appropriate to bring up for this particular segment.
Well, I mean, that seems to be a really big thing in gaming now, is these games that are strictly narrative driven, and all you're doing is basically living through a story. I mean, you get a game like, was it Dear Esther, or that new one that just came out? Oh my god.
That's escaping your mind.
Yes, it is. The one, there was this whole hullabaloo because there was no sprint button, and they just didn't really tell you that there was.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really, everybody's gone to the Rapture. That game.
Oh, yes.
So it's these games where that's all you're doing. You're exploring, and they're not difficult. You're just watching a story unfold.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those different strokes kind of thing.
But it's just, at the same time, like, for me to bring that up, that's just a completely different type of game. I mean, to what we're probably supposed to compare them to anyhow.
Yeah.
Well, even Greg just touched on something else. Like, people were complaining that, there was a sprint button, but they couldn't find it. Games hold your hands nowadays. Like, I can't stand when I'm playing a game and I die 3 times. You're like, is this too hard for you? Do you want us to lower the difficulty and make it a little more accessible? It's like, no, I ain't a fucking pussy. Like, fuck you.
Yeah, it's almost insulting when they do that. So
it legitimately makes me angry.
And you know who? Well, Nintendo games kind of do that recently too, and that's kind of annoying.
I feel like Mario, unfortunately, was the one that really started that trend.
Oh yeah,
Super Mario 3D World.
Yeah, if you died too many times, I believe they gave you a power-up that made you like invincible to beat the level.
I'll be honest, I tried it once just out of curiosity, but it was on a level like I'd already beat before.
Yeah.
I just wanted to see what actually happened, but outside of that one time, I'm like, well, no, fuck this. Now I just want to beat it just to be like, fuck you to this computer NPC that can't do anything to me anyway.
It also gave you a ton of lives. Like, I ended up with like 40 lives in that game. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt. The challenge, I mean, overall, that is kind of, I guess, insulting to like veteran Mario players, but like it does have its gems of like levels today.
It's nice, but to a Nintendo World Champion like myself, I don't want to deal with that.
Agreed. All right, I'm gonna throw it over to you, Greg. Like, what game do you have on hand that may be a little too easy, but the storytelling is pretty stellar?
No, I mean, it could be just me and other Grand Theft Auto vets, but I personally thought GTA 5 was incredibly easy from a difficulty standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, big thing throughout that is obviously going to be the combat and the driving, but there are little ways you could just kind of game the system. I mean, headshots are incredibly easy. You just kind of pop up and it just almost auto aims over and just pop up.
It really does. Yeah, without a doubt.
I mean, yeah, you can turn it off, but if I'm playing just the default way and not tweaking anything, it's just way too easy. But at the same time, it was one of the more interesting stories I've played in a game in quite some time. I mean, as somebody who loves the GTA world and loves the different things you get to experience doing that, I mean, that was a game that, even though it was easy, is definitely worth playing, even as somebody who's never played a Grand Theft Auto game before.
Yeah, I mean, that is some great points. But yeah, you're right. Even I've noticed, like, you know, like in retrospect, like thinking back to like the time, like I haven't beat it yet, but I think I've put in a decent amount of hours. I put like 35.
I've beaten it twice.
Yeah, and like honestly, you're just going through the motions. Like I can't even recall like the only way I may have gotten wasted in that game is if I did something stupid. Like
that's pretty much all it is for me. Like, one thing I'll try to do to make it difficult for myself is to play it only killing someone with headshots, and if I can't kill him with the headshot, I run the fuck away. But yeah, I mean, like, I've died in some really dumb ways. I showed Mike one time, I found an El Camino, got the guy that I stole it from, I backed into him so his body flipped over into the bed, then drove around, called the cop, just to wait and see how long it took for them to realize, hey, shit, there's a dead body in there.
Unbelievable. And what about you, Mike? Like, what's a game that you found that was a little too easy, but the storytelling was there?
Well, great story, but, you know, disappointing gameplay. BioShock Infinite for me. I mean, that was a game where I found that I was really only playing to continue to see what happens next in the story. The gameplay, it wasn't that tough. It didn't even like really grab me, and it's incredibly disappointing coming off of the original BioShock, which again, great story, and I think that one had great gameplay and challenge.
Yeah.
You know, in the first one, there weren't a ton of bullets. You had to really kind of think about your plasmids, and then when you got into like a Big Daddy fight, there was, you know, it felt intense. You're like, I don't know how I'm gonna, you know, take this on and handle this. Whereas in Infinite, it was just, and part of it was the way that the world was created. They just moved so heavily to gunplay, where it was just like a standard shooter. I just felt like I was playing Call of Duty, and the only times it was even remotely challenging was when there were just a lot of enemies, and that's like, you know, that's not really that big of a deal.
But yeah, that could go with any game that just throws a lot of enemies at the screen.
Yeah,
it's gonna get a little, you'll get a little flustered, but you know, once you take them out slowly but surely, like you know, that's it. There's nothing else really to it.
Exactly. You know, fantastic story though. I mean, you know, that was one game where I really felt, you know, a genuine emotional connection with a character, which is still, at least for me, somewhat rare in games. You know, it's only really happened a couple of times. You know, Last of Us, another example. Like, I loved that story. I felt genuine, like, emotional connection with those characters. But again, I felt the gameplay was a little lacking. Kind of like Greg was saying, there were ways to kind of game the system. I thought it was way too easy to just funnel enemies into choke points and then just take them on one at a time, and, you know, not even use like my weapons, like, and just save my ammo. So, like, even Resident Evil 4, like, yeah, the president's daughter was a pain in the ass, but you actually had to protect her. Like.
Yeah, totally. I get that. And like with the amount of griping that we're doing, you know, in a respective manner, I think it'd be best to bring up like maybe some games that definitely stepped it up in difficulty, but was able to deliver like a great story to go along with it. That almost makes it like almost a classic at some point, at some time. I have an example. I feel the pick is Shadow of the Colossus for me. You had a pretty basic story. You know, you're trying to revive a princess. It's you and the horse. You know, nothing. Once you get out in that world, there is nothing telling you exactly what to do. You're wandering around for like 5, 10, who knows, 15 minutes. And, you know, it was just, as soon as you approach a boss, your first boss, it's like, how do I take down this thing? It's like 20, 30 times bigger than me. Like, like more than that. You're a speck compared to the Colossi. And it's just, you know, once you're, there's no arrows telling you where to go yet. Yeah, there's a little flashing point on the Colossus, but like, that just goes to show, like, it can't be a complete, like, guesswork, but there is a sort of trial and error when it comes to how you're gonna, where you got to attack the foe, how you're gonna take it down, how are you gonna approach it. And I thought that was really great. Had some great challenges. As a matter of fact, I played that with Dimitri, and we played the entire game together, and we found a great challenge in it, as far as like looking for the Colossus, destroying it, and where to move on next. And then once you get to the end, I'm not going to spoil it because, yeah, it's a 15-year-old game, but if you still haven't played it by now, I would strongly encourage you to give it a shot. It really delivers like something special that you don't see in too many games today.
Yeah, that's a fantastic game. That's one of my favorite ones of all time. And exactly, like, when you play it, like, though it was generally like the fun was from like, how am I gonna, you know, this thing's gigantic, like, how do I tackle it, how do I hurt it? That's what made it so fun. It was like a simpler story, but even with their simpler storytelling, I think they managed to actually create a pretty good emotional connection amongst the characters in that.
Oh yes,
I mean, it's really, even the storytelling, it's really only like slightly a step above maybe like, you know, Super Nintendo, or, you know, even a lot of PlayStation games, you know, probably actually had more storytelling, but like, again, they still, you know, it was a very artistic game. I would almost kind of even compare it to like a silent movie, like in a game where there's like a, you know, here's something where there's not, it's, you know, there's not, they're not holding your hand story-wise.
Oh, without a doubt.
There's nothing to read, but like, you're still engrossed in this story, and there's still, you know, you're still creating these emotional connections with the characters.
Oh, without a doubt. And Greg, I would like to hear an example from you, like, as far as a game that definitely had its difficult moments, but definitely was able to keep you more encouraged to keep going for having a great story.
Well, I'm going to go with one of my favorite franchises, and that is God of War, and more specifically, God of War 3. I mean, traditionally, that's a franchise that is known for being extremely difficult, and it continued on in 3. They didn't pull back any punches. Enemies were still just as difficult as they had always been, if not even more so, because they were able to put even crazier enemies in the game World 40, but it still continued this great story that taps into Greek mythology, and you get to just experience something that, to me, I personally loved. I've honestly been tempted to kind of pick up that remaster that's coming out, even though I
was
still
just
have
about
it
to
on
mention
PS3,
that. But yeah, that is a good point. That the game, the franchise in general, has always been solid. Like, even with the worst one of the series, Greg, what was it, Ascension? Like, did it still prove to? I mean, maybe it wasn't the best story told, but was the challenge still there?
See, actually, the story had nothing to do with the quality of the game. The story was still good. I mean, I still thought it was kind of odd that they even bothered doing it, because 3 ended in such a way that it really should have just been done at that point, but it wasn't.
Agreed.
Oh, but,
it's all good.
But what really irked me was just the way like, they almost tried to make it too difficult. Like, the enemies were just unfairly difficult to the point that they were basically more overpowering than they should have been. Like, you couldn't actually defeat them. It actually felt like they took a little bit of Mega Man 3 and put it into God of War. Like, the enemies just didn't make sense. Like, they didn't die in ways that they should at certain points.
Yeah.
And so you would end up replaying an area a couple of times, and I eventually reached that point where I'm just like, fuck this, I'm done.
But eventually you picked it back up, eh? And you were able to tackle it once you took that little break.
No.
No? Well, okay.
I'll stick
I
with
did the best I
love
could.
the other 5 God of Wars.
Well, fuck it. What can you say? And finally, I'll toss it over to you, Mike. Like, I want to know what game proved a challenge to you and challenged your mind in having a solid story.
Well, one was actually kind of a game that caught me off guard. Metro 2033, and also the sequel Metro Last Light. Didn't really pay much attention. I heard about him on the PC, and like I knew it was this kind of Eastern European game. It was making some noise, but I'm not a PC gamer, so they had the first one I played was Last Light, and it came out on free for PS Plus, so I downloaded it, and it was amazing. Like, you know, awesome story, awesome setting, and just, you know, I'm not even really much of a first-person shooter fan, but that's the type of shooter that really grabs me. It's not just running through levels, shooting stuff up. There was stealth involved, you know, there was, you know, a lot of survival horror elements, and again, it's a game where you have to kind of think about how you're going to play because there's limited resources. So, you know, you can probably shoot your way through, but it's not necessarily the best way to go about it. You know, sometimes stealth is necessary. You know, sometimes you have to try and, you know, even back away from like some of the more mutant-esque monsters. And then they just created a really just engrossing world, you know, really fascinating. All these different factions in post-apocalyptic Russia, and it's very believable. You can kind of see how these things would have evolved out of a Russia in that situation. So both of those, and they just did a remastered version of both of them, and they actually have some pretty significant graphical upgrades, especially on 2033, which is a pretty old game by now.
Yeah.
And it was free on Plus.
And
It was.
Wait, 2033 as well?
No,
Yeah.
brain fart. I got it on Amazon Play, $20.
Nah, that's still not bad.
Redux.
Yeah, okay. Alright, yeah, that's not
what I'm
bad.
thinking.
Well, I
it
think,
was a good deal.
yeah,
What
well,
was
that
it like playing the original after starting with the sequel?
yeah, that's a good question.
You know, like this, it's one of those games where like they still did a good job, you know, playing the sequel where you didn't feel like you missed a whole bunch. Going back, it was kind of like, you know, I would say it's probably the same as watching a movie and then having a prequel come out. Like it filled in a lot of backstory and characters that made a little more sense, you know, when you went back and then, you know, looked at it in retrospect.
That's kind of, yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think, you would think that playing the sequel first, it would really leave you in the dark. I mean, no pun intended. You know, Last Light.
But again, I mean, to go back to BioShock, it's kind of the same thing. Like, you know, if you play BioShock and BioShock Infinite, you know, there's elements of actually not Infinite. What's the second BioShock?
BioShock 2.
BioShock 2.
Oh, it's just BioShock 2.
Yeah.
Well, if you play
Simply.
those ones, like, and then you go to Infinite, like, you know, it makes more sense. There's more stuff you get. There's more relevance to it. But then, you know, you can play Infinite on its own, and it's a perfectly good standalone story.
Well, I think we've all made some solid choices in the games that we decided to talk about, whether it became games that were just too easy these days, but, you know, like the story, it was still there, and, you know, and then talking about games that, all right, there's a few gems out there that we've mentioned that they are proven difficult, but still, like, it couldn't get any better with the story. I think that's great. I think we've made some solid points, and that will bring us to the conclusion of our show. You know, like this video, comment, let us know what games that you felt that were difficult, or maybe not too difficult these days, and also subscribe. And also check out the links below, GamersLife.Guru, the Turbo Ether Facebook, and follow Gamers Life Guru on the Twitter as well. Follow Turbo Ether should have a Twitter soon. And I think that brings it to the end for us, and I think, you know, hopefully in the future we can find some more games that will continue to bring us a challenge and not hold our hands, and to give us what we look for when we, I mean, I want to speak for all of us, when we look forward to playing in a game, we need a little bit of that challenge. Bring that challenge on. And on that note, folks, may the Triforce be with you, and take care.